This is Rugby Unity. I am David Pembroke, and if you did listen to the last program with Ewan McKenzie, you would know that I mentioned that Eddie Jones was sick, but off his deathbed. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, he is joining us now from Tokyo. Eddie, the flying has caught up with you, and you've got a bit of a flu, but you're well enough to have a bit of a chat with us this morning, so I'm very grateful for that. Are you okay?
Yeah, no, I'll survive, Temby. I'll survive, mate.
Excellent, excellent. So, listen, we were going through and just assessing with you and Mackenzie last week some of the teams and some of the ones that we didn't get to as we were just looking at them at the end of the year. And Australia was one that we were just about to start talking about. So what's your views on just exactly where Australia finishes 2025?
Well, they started the season with a couple of ordinary performances, had a really good mid-season, didn't they? You know, they played well in the Lions, second and third test of the Lions season at the start of the Rugby Championship, and then sort of petered out since then. And I think it, again goes down to, and Joe Schmidt's been talking about, the lack of development of players in Australia. I just don't think they've got the depth of other countries, and that's resulted in them, I think, not declining, but not going forward as they would have hoped. And I still think they've got a very good team there. They've got a good top 23, 25 players. But to be at the top table of world rugby now, in reality, you need at least two of each. And we saw France in the last World Cup, at tight head, they struggle at tight head. So you need each position, two or three deep, at least two or three deep. And Australia just don't have that at the moment. So I think in terms of the team, they developed really well. I think Joe's done a great job with them. They changed their rugby a lot during the season. I think, initially last year they played, more of the Joe Schmidt, very structured three or four phases. Everyone knows where they are. Everyone knows who he's going to clean out. And then it morphed into this two-sided, very tight attack, based a lot around Will Skelton's ball carrier ability, and then the ability of the backs to swing when they saw the opportunity. And it worked best when James O'Connor was at 10. Then towards the end of the season, they tried to open the game up a little bit more, and in a lot of ways they created opportunities, but again weren't good enough at finessing the finish, and we're seeing that a lot in world rugby at the moment. The teams that are able to create opportunities and then finish are the teams that are the ones who are finishing in the happy dressing room at the end of the game. You just look at South Africa at the start of the game against Ireland. Delendy goes through a beautiful offload to the number 8, creates a quick ruck, and then Chesney Colby makes a really good decision on the end. Steph deployed, good catch and pass to the winger, and they score, or a fullback, and they score. And that's the difference between the teams at the moment. So if I was an Australian fan, and I am, I'd be full of hope for the team going forward. But the problem is they've still got a systemic problem, mate. Which they failed to deal with.
So let's go to that, because that is the system that is developing the players. And I know, let's not go over, too much old ground. But where and how do you fix that?
Well, I think, the most obvious is to centralise your resources. Probably have 3 teams and 1 development team. And that development team could be the force where you put all your young players who need to play Super Rugby on a regular basis. You basically your third tier player play all your best players in the top 3 teams, Wallabies, Reds, Brumbies. Make sure you've got fantastic academies associated with those, and satellite academies. And you're spending more money making sure that you're picking up the best young players at the developmental ages around that 15, 16. You're not letting those players slip through the rugby league, the ones you want to keep, and then it'll flow from there, mate. I don't think it's too complicated. The complication is the politics. which is always particularly in Australian rugby. It's the politics that stop common sense in terms of development.
All right, we'll leave it at that. That's pretty clear. Now, in terms then of the way selection happened for the Australian team this year, you and Mackenzie made the point that, you know, perhaps at different times there wasn't quite the coherence in the selection of the team. Did you see the same thing, or did you feel that the selection was based on resources available at the time, opposition that was required, you know, to play a particular way in a particular context? Or did you feel that perhaps that was an uneven part of Australia's year?
Well, if you just look at the history of Joe Schmidt, I think he's been pretty good in selection. You know, he selects pretty well. And there's no reason why he would have gone away from his normal or innate way of selecting a team. So I would tend to think, you know, the resources he had available at the moment, because now you don't tend to get as much information about injured players. One of the things I love in the American sports, you know, having been there for 3 weeks, you know, at the start of the week they put out an injured list and you're quite clear where that player sits. In rugby, you know, there's still this mystique hiding players. Like, you know, for instance, in the last test, was Valentini really fit? You know, if he was fit, he probably would have started. But maybe he was carrying some sort of an injury that prevented him from starting the game. So I think, you know, Joe's a good selector. I've got no reason to doubt that he wasn't selecting in a good way and that the resources available were the restricting factor.
I think that goes to the point, and it's not just Australia, but I think it's the game more broadly in terms of we are still 30 years young as a professional sport, and we carry a lot of the legacy of the amateur era. And this idea of putting the fans at the centre of decision-making, such as providing the right information at the right time, so there is certainty and clarity, and there is responsiveness to what fans are requiring. I just think it's a real work on for rugby if indeed we're going to continue to grow the game, because that type of information builds interest, it builds appeal, it builds certainty. So, yeah, I just think, again, that's another great example of where we do need to get to. So we roll into next year, we roll into the Nations Cup. A new coach takes over 3 test matches into the new year ahead of 2027. Do you know Les Kiss and understand? You know, do you have any feel as to how Les Kiss is going to go about the role of coaching Australia? Do you have any feel for what he may do?
Yeah, well, I ran into Les a few times when he was at London Irish as head coach under Declan Kidney, who was the director of rugby. You know, and he's had a very strong apprenticeship. Les, you know, he did his time in Super Rugby in Australia, has coached extensively in Ireland and in England. So he's been through the ropes. He understands the rigours of professional coaching, and I think he'll be very well organised. He'll have a clear view of how he wants to play the game. Yeah, he's always been a more defence-minded coach. He's always coached the defensive side of the game. So it'll be interesting to see whether he takes that defensive mindset to the Australian team, which, you know, in a large part, apart from probably, you know, Rod McQueen's era, which was one of the most successful, which John Muggleton had a very strong influence on the team in terms of their defence. But they were gifted with a number of, you know, some of the generational players that, you know, every coach wants to have: the Horans, the Littles, the Ross, the Gregans, the Larkins, you know. Those sort of guys, when you got those sort of guys, you don't have to spend too much time on attack. You know, I'll tell you a story on that. I remember spending a week with Wayne Bennett up at Broncos, and they'd done defence all week, and I said to him, "Oh, you haven't done much attack this week." He said, "I don't have to, mate. I've got Lockyer." You know, and so, you know, when you've got those gifted players, you don't have to spend a lot of time on attack. That's not to say that Australian side didn't, but they had a much more defence-focused mindset, and it'll be interesting to see whether Les brings that to the Australian side and tries to create this much more defensive-minded. The Australian players, to me, have always been Yeah, they like to attack. We like to attack. We like to take the opposition on. We like to show how clever and strong we are with the ball. So, yeah, I think that'll be one of the things to assess pretty early. And it's
But
a
I,
difficult time for him to take over, mate. You know, no one should doubt how difficult that's going to be. Taking over 3 tests into the series, he's coming off a Reds campaign, his preparation time. You know, the staff in place. The staff in place is obviously going to be Joe's staff, and whilst him and Joe, I know him and Joe have got a really good relationship. You know, there are differences in how head coaches operate and therefore how the staff operates. So, you know, there'll be some orientation periods there.
But the Queensland Reds under Les over the last little while have been quite attacking. You know, kicking for touch a lot, always looking to score tries. They've been a little more attacking than that sort of obvious defensive mindset. So it would seem that he does like to move the ball at times when there is the opportunity.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying that, mate. But yeah, I think teams either have an identity around defence
Right.
or identity around attack, and I think the Australian side generally their identity has been around attack, and it'll only be a subtle shift and it's only a nuanced change, but it'll be interesting to see whether that comes forward, and you maybe see with that a little bit more line speed from Australia, a bit more aggression, because the line speed under Laurie Fisher. He plays that more connected defence, stay connected. And there's 2 ways of going about it. You either go line speed or you go connectiveness or you go in between. And maybe Australia's tended to be more connected, and whether Les will bring a more aggressive approach to a bit more line speed, which has its risk because then you tend to defend a bit narrower and the outside space can be exposed.
So he takes over 3 games into next year after the Nations Championship, or the first round, or the first part of the Nations Championship. What can be done as a rugby community to support Les in that role, given it will be so difficult ahead of the 2027 World Cup here in Australia?
I think it's just an understanding of the situation, mate, that it is going to be difficult. He's taking over a team that hasn't done well for a period of time now. And he's coming in halfway through the season, allowing him to find his feet, allowing him to get his feet under the table and find out, what sort of team he can produce for the World Cup in 2027. Because one of the things he's got massively in his favour, mate, massively, is having a home World Cup. Like, that is a massive advantage. Players are highly motivated. Players who mightn't think about doing a little bit extra or think about doing extra because it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for players. For a head coach, it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity coaching your home team at a home World Cup. You've generally got the community behind you, supportive, and you're the centre of the stage in Australia for that period of time. And there's no better opportunity to coach, no better opportunity to play and perform. So, there's a lot of advantages there, mate.
Yeah.
The referees help you, mate. Don't ever disregard that. That is a key fact. And I don't mean that in any sort of untoward way. But if you just look at decisions, particularly on TMOs in the recent Nation Cup, the influence of the home crowd has a massive, or what looks at more closely and what doesn't, and that's just natural. That's not anything underwater at all. And in Australia, it'll be the same. When you're a home team, you get a few advantages, you get a few close calls, which you mightn't get away from home. And that's why it's so hard to win away from home.
So France defeated Australia in that last test, 48 points to 33. When you look at the French team, wonderfully talented team, how do you assess where they are? And obviously that's a little bit difficult at the end of November, given they are really just, it's the beginning of their season.
Yeah, they appear at the moment to be treading water a little bit. I'm not so sure where they're going with the team. And I think part of that is that, if you look at it, they've hardly been playing any international games. The only international games they play is in November. They sent their, what was, uh, in all respect, their C team to New Zealand for the 3-match series. So, they basically handed those 3 tests to New Zealand on a platter. And they're still ranked 5th in the world. But the team from the World Cup in 2023, at the end was exposed, again by fine margin. It was exposed in the scrum. Have they improved in that area? They got DuPont to come back. Will DuPont recover from his ACL? Because usually, the general rule of thumb is that it takes 12 months to get your explosiveness back. So DuPont without explosiveness, will he make a difference to the team? And their forward pack seems to be moving all the time, and whilst they still retain that same pattern of quite short, squat front rowers, massive logs, some light, fast back rowers. Maybe at the moment it's unclear who their best pack is. So I'd say they're in a bit of a grey zone at the moment, but not in a negative way at all. I think they can easily progress quickly, and in fact, I think for the Six Nations, the clash between England and France and Ireland, those 3 teams at the top will give you a better indication of where they're at. Because they'll all be 100% for that.
Yeah. No, all right, very good. And Scotland, obviously an unhappy November, losing to Argentina, losing to the All Blacks, plenty of calls for the coach's head. There's a lot of talent in that Scottish team, and they do promise a lot at times. Where do you think things went wrong for them in November?
Well, if you look at the Argentina game, they got out to 17-0 lead. And looked like a really good team. And Argentina, as we know, is a very good team. They can trouble anywhere in the world. They're right on the edge of that top 4 bracket, but just can't break through. So they're at the top of the next tier within the tier 1, Argentina. So getting beaten by Argentina is no surprise. New Zealand just got them at the end again. It was 17-all. They had an opportunity to win the game at the end. Scotland, they weren't quite good enough, so they're not that far away. But probably the thing that stands out is that their best players are now probably getting towards the end of their career rather than the start of their career, and they've probably had their midnight, as we speak about, to win, and they're probably past that. So now that they've got to find some new talent coming through. Whether that's available in Scotland, which has a small, limited pool of players, and you look at some of their most influential players that come from outside that pool of players, and that takes 5 years to bring those players through. Luhan, Merva, the centre from Australia, those guys that come outside the pool. So, and Dempsey, doing really well for them. Yeah. So you just maybe a little bit of a question mark there on how much they can keep going forward, or whether they'll stabilise and then eventually decline. There's a question mark there.
So the out-and-out performers of 2025, and really particularly the November series, were South Africa, but not far behind them were your old team, England. They perhaps, unlike Scotland, very much coming up, building depth into their side. When you look at England, how do you assess the English team at the moment?
Yeah, well, England's been through that mucky period, Steve, for the first 2 years, was going through that transitional period of some of the older players declining, some of the new players not being quite good enough. and what's eventuated is that, some of the senior players have resurrected their careers and providing great value, like Jamie George, Luke Cowan, Dickey, Elliot Bailey, Ben Spencer doing really well. And then they've got this crop of new young players coming through that look like they can really make an impact in international rugby. Finn Baxter, Leafs Head, the Northampton Locks Cole's starting to mature now. It's got good engine on him, works hard, complements Chitaje. He plays a bit wide, is a bit faster. In the back row, Curry, still only a young man. He's only 26, 27 Curry. And, full of vibe. Looks like he's partly recovered from that serious hip injury. Underhill's found himself again. Earls keeps progressing as an international player. And in the back line, Lawrence maturing. And they got a plethora of good young fast wingers now. They're looking pretty handy, mate. But my question mark on them would be always, can they score enough points in big games?
Okay, so give me a bit more detail about that. Where don't you think they've got points in them?
Well, I think, they play that very, South African style of play. Contest kick out of your own half, try to play off the scraps of the contest kick. And then they don't have as much power as South Africa do in the forwards, the power over close to the line, so they've got to finesse that a bit more. And it'll be interesting to see whether they can create those opportunities, in the Six Nations around that goal line. Because, as I spoke before, I think the game's really morphing into almost like there's three thirds in the field now. You've got that get out, which is generally a long kick or a high kick. Then you get in the middle of the field, and most teams are using a high kick to promote themselves up the field. And then it's an Aussie rules, like win the scraps, play quickly off the scraps. And then once you get in the 22, there's this almost like this NFL power game. And I think that's the evolution of rugby going forward.
Do you think that, how long do you think it'll stay in that period? Is that the sort of 2027 model that people will need to build their expertise and understanding to be successful at 2027? Is that the game?
Well, I think the great thing about the game in rugby is that it never stays stable. It's always moving. Because we've got such an influence, the referee's such an influence, as we've spoken about before. Just look at you and I were speaking before the autumn series about the lack of significance of the scrum, and just look at what happened in November. The scrum became very impactful, and I saw a number of commentators complaining about the way South Africa used the scrum. What a load of rubbish. It's an important contest in the game. They should be allowed to use it how they want it. If the opposition can't do it, if you get beaten at the breakdown, the referee doesn't say, "Hey, stop contesting the breakdown now, boys. You're too good." You just can't have that. And but again, that reinforces that rugby's a game played on 15 on 15 because we want to keep 8 in the contest in the scrum. So we need to make sure that we find some way to get back to that situation.
Yes, well, let's not go down that path again to open that can of worms. It's certainly been a battle on TikTok this week for me around 15 on 15, trying to
What are you
argue.
getting hammered, mate?
I've been getting hammered. But,
good on you.
Yeah, but trying to fight the good fight because, again, we do know that we have this wonderful game that when it is played 15 on 15 and when it is played at its best, there is no more compelling entertaining sport in the world. And what we did see from November was some more financial results, and nobody else seems to be as interested about it as I am. But Scotland still losing money, Ireland losing money, and England, yes, a big turnaround, but still losing money. So again, if we are going to help secure the future prosperity of rugby union around the world, we need to get more people in more countries caring more about the game, and the only way that we will do that is if we can play the game at its very best, and at its very best it is 15 on 15. So just a final question around that, because the big argument is, if it's 15 on 15 and there are no consequences for cynical play, it'll then just deteriorate. So have you had any further thoughts about how we can develop a game that accepts that there are risks when you go onto the game, accepts that there are rugby accidents, but also at the same time discourages cynical play and therefore punishment can be dealt with on the day and not just perhaps subsequent to the match?
I think if you went down the line of if a player was yellow carded, you can replace that player. There has to be some sort of demerit system for that player, so that if you accumulate 2 of those yellow cards, then you get an automatic suspension for 2 matches. For instance, just an example. So there has to be a punishment for the player, and therefore, if you're a coach and you've got one of those players, you're not going to want that player to be in that situation, right? Because he's in your best 15, generally speaking. So now he's put himself out of the game for 2 games. So there'll be a writing system for that. That'll write itself. Players will be less inclined. I don't think, generally speaking, the game now is so clean. The cynical part of the game, yes, okay, let's be hard on it when we need to be hard on it, when there's a really blatant cynical act. Let's be hard on it. But in terms of violence, the game is there's no violence in the game now. There's physical intensity. Probably the only bit of play I saw that was really reckless was that James Ryan cleaning out, where the players set at the height, right? The players set at the height. There's no change in height there by the player. I think it was the Springbok 3, and he's flying in. So the risk there is high, and I think that sort of thing should be dealt with. But when you've got a player changing height, which is generally the case on the second man tackle, not generally the case, is almost always the case, then we've got to be more sensible about that. And those players don't deserve to be in the sin bin or don't deserve to have a red card for 20 minutes. We proved conclusively that Hockney's tackle was completely legal, and they couldn't debate it. They couldn't debate it, but because the bloke's head had that whiplash, then it becomes a penalty. And in fact, the referee missed the knock on. He played on. He was so obsessed with the crowd and the reaction to the head whiplash that the player who carried the ball knocked it on, and they played another phase after that and didn't pick it up. So that's where we've just got to be more sensible about the game.
My sense of it also, and again, there's lots to commend World Rugby on, and even I think it was the Six Nations who was running the November series, the Six Nations organisation, is the lack of communication with fans about these matters, where we're not talking, where we're not having the conversations during the week, and whether they feel that it puts undue pressure on the referees, I don't know. But I just think it's outdated. People expect information now. They expect it quickly. And I do think that we need to be more transparent in what those conversations are. And again, in terms of the governance of the game and being able to move more quickly to make some of these adjustments, it just has to happen. Because otherwise we're just going to continue to be in this position where we're not attracting enough people to the game. Yes, we've got the rusted on people who are always going to go to the rugby, but those new audiences who would come to the game if it was more appealing for them, it's just I know it's a difficult challenge. I don't have all the answers, but I think transparency, responsiveness, agility in decision-making has to be fundamental. So, Eddie Jones, you finished November. What's your wrap-up of November when we look back at that series, and what would you give it as a sort of out of 10 mark? A lot of people are saying, there were a lot of great matches. For me, I didn't think it was a great November series. There were moments, there were parts of games that were entertaining, but I didn't quite think it certainly didn't reach my hope of expectation of sort of really outstanding rugby matches, and that was perhaps because of some of the decision-making that was made by the referees under instruction by, World Rugby and the current arrangements that are in place.
Look, by and large, I thought it was, just watching it as a rugby fan, apart from that, I made the comment about that South African Island game, which I found very tedious because of all the intervention. I really enjoyed the games, really enjoyed the rugby. And you got to remember, in the Northern Hemisphere, the grounds are softer, they're wetter, and the ball doesn't travel as quickly. So it tends to be more attritional rugby. And I really enjoyed that. It was interesting going to Georgia on the weekend. The light was much brighter, the ground was harder and faster, and the ball was much drier. Completely different circumstance to what we've been playing in. So I think considering that, and that's what I like about the Northern Hemisphere rugby, you get this hard attritional play, and you've got to be good enough to fight your way through it to be able to shift the ball. So, I'd give it a pretty big rap, mate, apart from the incessant CMOing.
Well, hopefully something will happen about that. And as I mentioned to you and Mackenzie, I'm in hot pursuit of Brett Robinson as our final guest of the year, where we'll get him on and make sure that you and Mackenzie are available, Eddie Jones, and we can have a very long conversation with our good mate Brett Robinson about his first year in the game and where he thinks things are, and put some of these challenges to him. So anyway, important as it always is to feature our friends in the community. The Third Voice, Matthew Kasolki on Facebook says, finally, rational, logical commentary. Sassy Holter says, I haven't heard anyone talk in a micro context on the subject of improving small nations. You and Mackenzie, you have pleasantly surprised me. Koronira Wiapana Hamu on YouTube Short says, all the best, Eddie. I love the Japanese rugby team. Kia ora boy from Aotearoa, New Zealand. And Johan Venter on YouTube says, I am Johan from Botswana. I am a Box supporter, and I agree 100% with your arguments. Thanks to the rest of the panel. And no, thank you, Johan, for sending in your comment. And please, everybody out there, whether it's on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Facebook, wherever. Facebook's a bit hot. I've got to find. I go quite happy on TikTok, but you get on Facebook and people just get so wound up. They're so aggressive. Calm the farm, people. But anyway, if you're on Facebook, send us something through because we're always very interested. And there's a question from Benny McClure to you, Eddie Jones, from Instagram. And Benny asks, would love to know Eddie's thoughts on reducing the number of replacements, top-level hybrids. What do you think, Eddie Jones? What's happening with the replacements? Do you think we've got enough? We've got too many? Where are we at with that?
Yeah, well, I think it's about right at the moment. I think eight's about right. I'd like to see, I've mentioned this before, you can make 12 interchanges in the game. Why 12, I don't know. But so if a player's injured and he can't participate in the game, he's got to go off immediately, and that's your interchange. So he can't stop a game for injury unless it's a spinal injury. So you play on. So we've got to keep the ball out of play time minimised. I think we've got to try to increase the ball in play, and to do that, have 12 interchanges. So you've got 8 players on the bench. You've got 12 interchanges, and you can use that. And I think that'd help improve the flow of the game. Because I think what we've got to be thinking about is how can we improve the flow of the game? How can the game get back to its more natural tempo and still have the accuracy of decision making and the safety of the players?
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Okay. So another question. Jeff Stein on YouTube said, why is it not the players and coaches' responsibility to make it a spectacle? Yes, the refs will make mistakes, but the players hold the ultimate responsibility to play within the rules.
Yeah, well, I think that's true. And if you're playing, 13A cricket for the Riverview versus St. Joseph, everyone plays within the rules. And then you get one naughty kid, who man-cads someone because the other blokes taking advantage of everyone being fair, then that's a really sick situation in competitive sport. So players will take the laws right to the edge, and that's what the good players do. Because one of the most interesting things can be you come up with a game of training, right? And the smartest players will find a way to break the rules to advantage themselves. And that's human nature. So I understand what you're saying, and in the idyllic world that would happen. But it's not going to happen in any sort of real competitive sport.
Okay, at Denver John from YouTube, rugby needs to adopt an NFL-style approach. No team should be forced to play with fewer players than the opposition. It defeats the entire purpose of seeing who's the best team. Well, we've been through that, and we are on a campaign. And PPOP has also asked, Eddie, could you lay out your ideal structure for rugby in Australia? But I think we answered that a little bit earlier on as well. So thank you to the third voice for keeping your comments and questions coming. And please, wherever you are, wherever you're engaging with us, indeed, please keep engaging with us. Keep the conversation moving, because it does help us to continue to look for ways and answers and other ideas about how do we help secure the future prosperity of rugby union around the world. So, Eddie Jones, I'm not sure if you got my email from earlier today, but I was asking for three things from November that you have either observed, either good, bad, indifferent. What might be the three things that you take away from this November as a way of reflecting on that period in the game?
Okay, well, I didn't apologies, but off the top of my head, number one, the ruck needs to get straighter. I think we've allowed the ruck to get to almost like 360 degrees. And not only from a contest point of view, but from a safety point of view, I think we need to get the entry points in the ruck a lot tighter, north-south rather than east-west. I think that's the number one thing. Number two, I think, how can the smaller nations create the depth to compete at the top level? I think we've seen, most of the countries being able to compete up to some for 20 minutes, some for 60 minutes. And then the power of the bench. So one of the things we're thinking about in Japan is how can we increase the depth of our players' playing pool to be able to compete at that level. Third thing, if I was a rugby coach at one of the top nations I've been and had the money, I'd employ an AFL coach. And above the head catching is going to become the next skill of the game. At the moment, we're because rugby is behind, we're allowing the players to disrupt, to go past the ball and disrupt. In rugby league, they cut that out. And I reckon to circumvent that, you need to be able to have players who can catch the ball above their head, which is a skill that can be developed with time, and certainly that'll be the skill I'll be looking at developing. And it's interesting, I saw some commentary on Sawali that people were disappointed with him. That was one of the significantly strong parts of his game, and how they can create situations for him to be able to catch that ball above his head, because he can do it better than anyone.
So just to that point about thinking about how do we create more depth, or how does Japan create more depth, what are some of the ideas that were kicked around amongst the coaches about how indeed you might do that?
Well, one of the things is, can we make the League One scrums more competitive? You've got to be doing that on a consistent basis, scrummaging hard at your domestic level to be able to produce players who can do it at the top level. And the difference between the front rowers now, I think it's probably the most significant part of the game. If you look at who makes the biggest difference coming off the bench, you'd almost argue it's either a flanker who can contest hard at the breakdown, or a front row that can disrupt the scrum and also can carry and tackle well around the ruck. That makes the most difference in the game.
And the AFL coaches, that idea, would that be something that Japan would be looking at, trying to get access to that expertise in coaching?
Well, if we can find a sponsor, we will, mate. We've got a very, like most countries, mate. Japan used to be the golden egg, but our budgets are really tight now. So to find resources to get people outside our coaching staff's not an easy thing at the moment.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's interesting. And again, I mentioned before some of the financial results coming out in November We've got a lot of work to do in the game to secure the future financial sustainability of the sport. And again, I think it comes back, as we've argued and discussed for the last few months since we've started Rugby Unity, is that a real focus on the game and getting the game absolutely compelling at its best, because there is no better sport when it is played at its best. So for my three things, Eddie Jones, I am all in on this Nations Championship and the World Rugby Nations Cup. I think it is a great initiative, and when you see that the draw that's been announced, and I know there's some difficulties in terms of travel for your own Japanese team, where you've got to come to Australia to play a game and then get back and all the other things. But I just think it will bring such interest to those particular matches where you do know that there's consequence, and where are teams going to finish? Are they going to finish above another team? Are they going for the final? Are they going to make the second, third playoff? So I'm big on that. I just think that has been, big congratulations to all the nations who've sorted that out, and also to World Rugby for the sponsorship of that World Rugby Nations Cup, which is that second level down, the balance of the teams that will compete at the 2027 Rugby World Cup: Canada, Chile, Georgia, Hong Kong, China, Portugal, Romania, Spain, Tonga, Uruguay, USA, Zimbabwe, and Samoa. And again, it'll give us the opportunity to get to know these teams, get to know some of these players, because the way it works at the moment is that when they arrive at 2027, at the previous World Cup in 2023, you wouldn't have known any of these players. You wouldn't have seen any of these teams. So that competition will give us the opportunity to watch and to observe and to enjoy those teams competing against each other. And it didn't happen in November, but the World XV tournament for women that's been announced by World Rugby, I think, is another big step forward for the women's game. Eddie Jones, the Sevens gets underway this weekend in Dubai. It's remodelled. Dubai, Cape Town, Singapore, Perth, Vancouver and New York. Lots of global coverage. But Sevens, where does it sit for you? Is it still a pathway? Is there still value? Or it's obviously an Olympic sport, so it will stay part of rugby and an important part of rugby. But what's your reflections on Sevens at the moment?
I still think it has great value as a development tool for young players, and particularly for backs playing in great space. Proves their breakdown skills, it proves their awareness of, finding support, looking for space, defending in space. But, economically, most countries are finding it's putting a real strain on their resources, and you have to weigh up, whether that investment in that area is worth it. And commercially it doesn't seem to have worked as a game around the world, and hasn't attracted the spectators we thought it would.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, the Sevens, for me, because particularly, and I know it's the Olympics, and you've said the same thing before about, you can watch anything at the Olympics and it'll draw a crowd. But certainly the men's and women's seven-a-side at the Paris Olympics, to me, was a revelation, situated as it was at the beginning of the actual Olympics themselves, in the main stadium, 6 sessions, absolutely chock-a-block, brilliant rugby played. I think there's something there. But that really does require some thought, and this new remodelled competition as to whether or not it's a better way. I think it's a more affordable way. Certainly it's going to be saving World Rugby considerable amounts of money, this new system that they've introduced. And if people are interested, as they should be, I would hope, if they're interested in rugby, you can watch it on Rugby Pass TV and a number of other outlets in other regions around the world. So that gets started this weekend. My other third thing is just to call out the England rugby union team for their communication. I think back to those earliest days, Eddie Jones, when you took over at England, the documentary style that was introduced, that set a new standard for the communication around national teams. And I think this current England team has taken it another step forward. I think they've been encouraged and inspired by the Women's Rugby World Cup and the way the Red Roses have communicated. And to see that personality, and I know there was some controversy about the England boys and their TikTok, and Schalkberger saying, oh, Henry Pollock is a TikTok dancer and, he plays rugby at the weekend. Well, I just think we do need to attract these audiences. We don't have enough money for sevens. We don't have enough money for the women's game. We don't have enough money for pathways. We have to find new audiences, and those new audiences are communicating in different ways. And so we need to be in places like TikTok with our stories, with our personalities, and a big congratulations to England leading the way, I think, in the communication space. And just as South Africa is ahead of the world at the moment, in the way they play the game and the on-field, I think England is in a similar position when you look at the game off the field. And just the final word on that is just to say congratulations to Abby Dow, the England winger who is retiring at 28 years of age, one of the great personalities of the Women's Rugby World Cup. I loved how she used to crochet these little gifts that she would give to her opponent before a match or after a match. It just was a lovely part of the storytelling that wrapped around that tournament. She scored 50 tries in 59 tests. So wishing her all the very best in her retirement. My understanding is that she is a mechanical engineer from ICL in London, which I understand also is one of the hardest degrees, so she's obviously very intelligent. So plenty to do, but enjoy retirement, and thanks for the memory. Eddie Jones, plenty of rugby still being played. The URC, the top 14, the Prem, the PWR. From your point of view, you'll keep watching those matches, will you, to continue to observe, understand, looking for the nuance, looking for the changes?
Yeah, watch certain matches, definitely. We've got our young fella, Saito, playing for Toulouse, so keep a close eye on him there. And League One starts in a couple of weeks, mate, so there's plenty to watch. Yeah,
indeed. And just a final question around the Wales South Africa game, the money game. It certainly stirred up a certain response. Obviously players playing in France and playing in England for Wales aren't available. I think 12 of the top South African team aren't available, but still they managed to pick a frighteningly good looking team to start that match. Where do you sit on these games that sort of sit outside the window? You obviously played South Africa in one on the other side of the window at Wembley, and this is a game that is being played after the window at Cardiff. What's your views? Are they good? Are they bad? Do we need the money?
It's a necessity of rugby economics, mate.
Yeah.
It's simple as that. Wales need the money, South Africa need the money, Japan certainly welcome the money. So it's a necessity of where the game is at the moment. And, the thing that sells is international games.
Yeah.
And they make, I don't know how much Wales profit they make from the home game at the Millennium Stadium, but I'm sure it'll be considerable. So, good luck to them.
Yeah, indeed. And let's hope that plenty of people turn out for that match. And just a final point, I suppose, about Wales. You've had a lot to do with Wales over the years in your role as England coach, but also just in your role as a sort of international leader in coaching. You've been down to many of the clubs at different times. A challenging time for Welsh rugby at the moment as they think about the future around provincial rugby and making the game stronger. Clearly, we've seen improvements from Wales in the November series under Steve Tandy. So perhaps just a final word, your views on Wales and this difficult path that lies ahead for them in terms of building that new structure for the future.
Yeah, well, it's difficult because it's political. I don't think it's difficult in terms of pathways and finding the right pathways. Now, I think, if the changing the coach will make a difference. He's a good coach and he'll do a great job. But the problem Wales have got is in their pathways, and they're trying to sort that out. Again, politics is stepping in the way, economics is stepping in the way. But at the end of the day, all of that, no one takes the blame when the team fails badly, apart from the coach and the players. But it's the pathway that's the problem.
Yeah.
They've let their pathway go. They haven't invested in it, and as a result, the quality of players aren't coming through.
Yeah.
Simple as that.
Yeah.
Get it right.
Yeah.
Just get it right.
Okay. Well, probably one thing people can do to support it, even if you're in England, go down and have a look at that game between Wales and South Africa to put a few dollars into the pockets of both the Welsh and South African rugby unions so they can fix those things. Well, Eddie Jones, we will be back early next week with our preview of the draw, which will take place in Australia December the 3rd. So we'll be previewing that and reviewing that next week, when we do know what those are. As somebody who is vitally involved a few days out, how do you think about it? Is it anticipation? Is it like you're going to get what you're going to get, so you don't really think about it? How are you feeling about the big draw next week in Sydney?
I haven't thought about it one bit. I've got no control over it. I don't really care. Whoever we get, we've got to be good enough to beat.
Yeah.
So I'll be excited once we get the draw, because then we can start planning, and then we can start putting our pre-World Cup games in place, because obviously you don't want to be playing against teams that you're playing against in the pool in the pre-season game. So it sets the draws a line in the sand for World Cup preparation, which is a good thing.
Yeah, it's sort of Ewan Mackenzie was saying that it's the point of, the gun fires, and it's then about, hotels, and it's about training, and it's about transport, and it's about everything that goes with it. So lots to do. But I'm sure people will be looking forward to your insights next week. And again, thank you to the Third Voice for coming back once again. Please keep the comments and questions coming. Very grateful to Eddie Jones of his deathbed. Hopefully by next week you'll be feeling a little bit better. But Eddie, thank you very much for joining us. And the Third Voice, thank you for joining us once again. But please, everyone, remind yourselves, be kind to each other. My name is David Pembroke, and it's bye for now.